October. Returning to school had always been a pleasure. It meant new pencils and composition books, the pencils smelling of cedar as you sharpened them. Most of the texts were dog-eared and scrawled with unfunny comments and crude drawings, but occasionally we were furnished with 2 or 3 books fresh from the presses, fragrant with new paper and printer's ink. The beginning of this school year was particularly memorable because I was entering junior high school. The senior high school pupils who sat in the forward part of the main assembly hall were disdainful of those of us who sat at the rear, but we realized that someday we would be as grand as they, and we had our own loyalties and interests which saved us from suffering too deeply the stigma of being both small and young. At least 2 of my new teachers were greatly gifted. Miss Stafford made English a delight, and Miss Whalen loved biology as my mother had loved it. My only reluctance upon hearing the first school bell in October 1918 was that I must end my summer with Rascal and lock him firmly in his chicken wire mansion. I had moved Wowzer's large doghouse to a position just outside Rascal's door. It would have to have been a brave boy or dog daring to risk intrusion upon my raccoon's privacy. Well aware of his trust, Wowzer lay just outside the cage, his large muzzle and deep, compassionate eyes turned toward the small prisoner just inside the wire. Rascal, reaching out to his shoulder, patted Wowzer's nose, and the St. Bernard invariably licked the little paw extended in friendship. When Rascal chirred or trilled, Wowzer answered with a big, gruff, affectionate bark, ending sometimes in a howl of sympathy. Donnybrook was also concerned, adding a soft whicker from the nearby paddock. There was a real companionship in that backyard. I did what I could to make the imprisonment more bearable. I always shared at least one meal a day in Rascal's cage, and we were together before and after school. I took him to the garden to help me harvest the dried navy beans and Hubbard squashes. He liked to have me rake leaves, burrowing into each bright pile and popping up to surprise me from unexpected places. And he became a real asset in the new job I had taken selling magazines. He attracted customers wherever we went. There must be hundreds of thousands of men who sold the Saturday Evening Post when they were boys, and I joined the ranks during the first week of October. I was very short of cash, and I realized that I would have to work harder if I were to ever earn the money for the canvas for my canoe. Putting Rascal into my bicycle basket, I pedaled down to the magazine and stationery store owned by Frank Ash, which occupied the building next to the Tobacco Exchange Bank. There were big bundles of posts that had just arrived on the Thursday train, and each of us took 50 copies as a starter. On the cover was a little girl placing a garland of flowers around a service flag, and I was impressed all over again by the fact that this magazine had been founded by Benjamin Franklin. Either Frank Ash or the circulation manager of the Curtis Publishing Company had made the diabolical decision in a desperate attempt to unload another of their periodicals. For each 50 posts that we had to sell 5 copies of The Country Gentleman. Ours was a town filled with retired farmers, but not one of them wanted that magazine. Rascal furnished such an animated sideshow, however, that we often persuaded customers to take both publications. We bicycled through the autumn dusk, crying, "Saturday Evening Post, 5 cents. Get your post here, mister. 5 cents, only 5 cents. Saturday Evening Post." It was rumored that in biology class we were to learn the facts of life that year. Most of us already had some information on the subject, but I was very vague as to how little girls are constructed. However, being not quite 12, I was not in complete despair about my ignorance. What did puzzle me, however, was how such a lovely, delicate creature as Miss Whalen, with the lights in her hair and eyes, could possibly tell a mixed class how babies are made. Fortunately, this would come much later in the term, and she would have many months to lead up to the subject by way of the lesser fauna. Our biology teacher had her own method of inspiring the class. She taught instinctively, If wild geese were noticed crossing the October sky, she would call us all to the windows to hear their distant clangor and watch them veering southward. She told us how one gander after another took the difficult position at the point of the V, breaking the air resistance for those behind, and how these same brave male birds, sometimes a widowed gander, kept lonely vigil all night, guarding over the flock while others slept. "We are on the branch of the great Mississippi Flyway," she said. "That is why we have the wonderful opportunity of watching so many thousands of birds migrating northward in the spring and south again in the autumn." Then she told us that wild geese, like swans, are mated for life and accompany each other season after season to rear their goslings in the Arctic and to the winter in the southern bayous. Wow, let's try that again. Then she told us that wild geese, like swans, are mated for life and accompany each other season after season to rear their goslings in the Arctic and to winter in the southern bayous. "That is why it's wicked to shoot a wild goose or swan," she said. "It leaves a widowed mate." On the first day of school, she captured our attention by asking us each about our pets. Almost everyone had a cat, or a dog, or a canary, or pony, but I was the only one in the class who had a raccoon. Many animals were invited on various days to attend our biology class. She asked Bud Baddock to bring his little terrier to school, and other pupils to bring goldfish, a parrot, a tame squirrel, but Rascal and I had the honor of receiving the first invitation. After class, I stayed for a moment to talk to Miss Whalen about my raccoon, and to ask her a question which had been intriguing me for several weeks. "Do you think raccoons will become human beings someday?" I asked hopefully. "Why Sterling? What a strange idea." "Ernest Houghton, who lives next door to us, is studying anthropology, and he has a theory that the hands teach the brain." "Yes," Miss Watson said thoughtfully. "Possibly they do. And he thinks that because our ape-like ancestors stood up and used their hands and developed simple tools, their brains developed too." "That's an exciting idea," my teacher said. "Well, my raccoon uses his hands all the time and gets brighter every day. So, in 100 million years or so, couldn't raccoons develop into something like human beings?" "Stranger things have happened," Miss Whalen said. "I'm very eager to see your bright raccoon." She gave me a warm smile, but she didn't laugh at me or call my questions silly. And I left the classroom feeling that Miss Whalen was a very special person. On the morning Rascal was invited, I brushed and combed him until his dark guard hairs shone, and his gray underfur was soft as lamb's wool. I used silver polish on his nameplate and saddle soap on his slender collar and leash. After all, it was to be Rascal's first day at school, and I wanted him to make the best possible impression. Fortunately, biology was our first class in the morning, so we didn't have to wait too long. Rascal's behavior was excellent. Clean, well-groomed, alert, and polite, he sat on Miss Whalen's desk as though he had spent most of his short life addressing biology classes. He asked a few questions about her glass paperweight, which, when shaken, produced a snowstorm over a toy village. And he gently examined this small globe of glass. "As you can see," Miss Whalen began, "raccoons are curious." And then she wrote on the blackboard, "Raccoon," an Indian word meaning he who scratches. Slammy Stillman raised his hand. "Does he scratch because he has fleas?" This produced laughter, and the teacher rapped lightly for order. I raised my hand and was acknowledged. "Miss Whalen, Rascal is perfectly clean. He goes swimming every day and has never had a flea in his life." "I think," said the teacher, "the Indians meant that raccoons scratch and dig for turtle eggs and other food along the shore. Sometimes they even dig for earthworms." Slammy scowled and slumped deeper in his seat. Does this raccoon remind you of any other animal? Miss Whalen asked. He looks a little like a bear, Bud Badcock said. You are right, Bud, the teacher agreed. He is a cousin of the bear and is sometimes called a wash bear because he washes all of his food, as we will show you in a few minutes. She took a piece of chalk and again wrote on the blackboard, Procyon lotor, his Latin name, meaning washer. I was intrigued because Miss Watson was telling us certain things that even I didn't know about Rascal. Now she brought out a shallow enameled laboratory pan, which contained not only water, but to my surprise, a crayfish. This she put before Rascal on her desk. Now let's see what the raccoon will do. Rascal, like the wonderful little ham he always was, looked around the class and off through the windows while running his hands with a kneading motion all over the shallow pan. He knew exactly where the crayfish was, but he was showing off. Suddenly, his body stiffened for a pounce, and 2 seconds later he had his prey fast in his grip and was washing it blissfully in anticipation of his feast. By this time, the class was almost as happy as Rascal, and almost everybody clapped. Raccoons are omnivorous, Miss Whalen said, writing that word on the blackboard. This means they will eat almost anything. They live from the Atlantic to the Pacific and from southern Canada to Mexico. They have 2 to 6 raccoon kits every May, usually in a hollow tree, and these kits mind their mother very well, trundling after her as she teaches them how to fish the edges of the creeks. They are friendly animals unless attacked, but sometimes can kill a dog if backed into a corner. Miss Whalen asked me if I would briefly tell my experiences with the raccoon, and I stood before the class, petting Rascal as I talked. I think we had the attention of all but Slammy, particularly when Rascal climbed on my shoulder and started vaguely playing with my ear. I even sleep with him sometimes, I confessed. He's a wonderful pet. Everyone wanted to touch him after that, so, one by one, my classmates came up and petted him, some of the girls pretending to be a little frightened. Slammy was the last in the line, and he slouched up, shifty-eyed and sneering. I was watching for trouble, but was just a moment too late. Just as he reached for the raccoon, Slammy stretched a heavy rubber band and snapped Rascal in the face. Very rarely before had I heard Rascal emit his scream of rage, but this was pure fury, a fight to the death cry. In a split second, Rascal sank his fine, sharp teeth into Slammy's fat hand. Slammy yelled until you could have heard him in the assembly hall. He danced around, shaking his hands, screaming, Mad Coon! Mad Coon! Mad Coon! You gotta shoot him right now! Mad Coon! Miss Whalen's voice was cold and severe. Slammy Stillman, everyone in this room saw what you did. If you think that this is a mad raccoon, then you need no other punishment than to worry if you will experience one with Babhibity. If you think this is a mad raccoon, then you need no other punishment than the worry you will experience wondering if indeed you have rabies. Here, use some of this iodine on your little bite. Class is dismissed. Sterling, will you stay for a moment? I didn't know what my teacher would decree, but it proved almost as severe a punishment as she has given Slammy. She said, I'm sorry, but under the circumstances, you will have to cage your raccoon constantly for the next 14 days. If he should show signs of rabies, we would still have time to get past your treatments for Slammy. But he isn't rabid, I protested. You saw what happened. I certainly did, and I feel certain that he's a perfectly healthy animal. But we can't take a chance. She was silent for a moment. When she turned her back to me, her mood had changed, and she said quietly, Rascal is a wonderful pet. Thank you for bringing him to my class, and for your good oral report. She petted the raccoon and added, You'd better take him home to his cage, Sterling. I'll explain to the other teachers why you'll be absent for the rest of the day. As I pedaled homeward with Rascal in the bicycle basket, I had already forgotten his recent fight. It was a crisp, clear autumn afternoon as we entered the cage to begin the 2-week sentence. I had a crazy, affectionate thought. If they have to lock up Rascal, they'll have to lock me up with him. We sat, eating soft-shelled pecans, wishing we could stay side by side forever, sharing a meal in each other's company. Slammy, unfortunately, did not die of rabies. In fact, the punctures in his hands healed almost immediately. But the punishment inflicted on Rascal and me continued. We were jailmates for as many hours a day as I could join him. Rascal was beginning to get slightly plump in preparation for winter. I gave him any food he wanted, so we were not too unhappy in his cage. On the 14th day of his confinement, when he had not shown a single sign of sickness, I opened the door and we frisked out into the autumn world. We walked up the street to Crescent Drive and turned down through the country lane through a world ablaze with autumn. It was Indian summer. The corn shocks, pale as buckskin teepees, pointed upward to the immense blue curve of the sky. Maples flamed along the ridges. As we passed Bardine's orchard, we helped ourselves to a few apples. Farther down the lane, where the fences were garlanded with wild grapes, Rascal dyed his muzzle purple with this pure pigment. Each autumn it was necessary to examine the hickory and walnut trees we had hoped to raid, and to estimate the number of muskrats living in the sloughs and ponds where we hoped to trap. This was a jaunt I usually took with my trapping and hickory nutting partner, Oscar Sunderland. Oscar was not at home, however, so Rascal and I made this survey without him. On the bank above the swimming hole, we came upon the sorrowful sight of a great walnut stump where a giant tree had been standing only a few months before. I had often rested in the shade of that tree and gathered its nuts in the autumn, staining my hands dark brown with the hulls. Here, too, I had captured the only royal walnut moth in my collection. Now the trunk had been cut for rifle stocks, as had so many walnut trees that season. I found a red writing stone in the creek in big angry letters printed on the stump, "Damn the man who cut this tree." Gradually, however, I forgot my anger as we skirted the marshes and ponds to the north. Never before had I seen so many new muskrat houses, these conical piles of reeds with underwater entrances, which made perfect homes for these harmless and interesting fur-bearing rodents. I had raised several muskrat kits and turned them loose over other years. I could never bear to kill and skin those I had reared by hand. Rascal and I sat silently beside a marshy pond where a few mallards and black ducks were tipping and preening. As evening began to fall, the muskrats came quietly from their half-finished houses and began to cut cattails, which they carried in their mouths through the still water to pile upon their homes. We wandered happily back through town, through the dusk, in the flame of the maples and the muted dying light.